I never expected my own family to betray me over money, but that's exactly what happened last year. My brother Alex and I grew up close, or so I thought. We attended the same schools, played the same sports, and even shared some of the same friends. I always assumed we had each other's backs. My parents used to brag about how well we got along, saying things like, "You two are so lucky to have each other." But I guess you never truly know a person until you mix money into the equation. That's where everything fell apart, completely. I worked hard throughout college, balancing 2 part-time jobs while studying. After graduation, I landed an entry-level position in marketing, which didn't pay much at first, but I kept grinding. Over the years, I rose through the ranks. My boss recognized my dedication, so he promoted me a few times. By the time I was 30, I had saved a decent sum of money. I always believed in living below my means, investing wisely, and preparing for the future. That's how I managed to accumulate around $50,000 in a savings account. I was incredibly proud of that achievement. I wasn't planning to flaunt my savings, but one evening during a casual family dinner, my mother asked if I had any plans for a new car or a house. She knew I was a cautious spender, but she also knew I'd been doing well. I admitted I had around $50,000 saved up, and her eyes lit up. My dad chimed in with a congratulations, and Alex just nodded. Later that night, Alex pulled me aside. He spoke in hushed tones about a business venture he wanted to start, asking if I could invest in his bright new idea. To be honest, I wasn't immediately dismissive. I love my brother, and I wanted to help him succeed, so I listened to his pitch. He talked about launching a small online retail store that specialized in fitness supplements. He seemed knowledgeable, and his plan sounded plausible enough that I considered it. But I'm nobody's fool. I told him I'd need to see a proper business proposal, financial projections, and all the standard details before handing over any money. He agreed and promised to get everything together soon. At that point, I still believed we were on the same side completely. Several weeks passed, and each time I asked Alex about his progress, he gave me vague answers. He'd say things like, "I'm working on it," or "I just need more time to finalize a few numbers." I started getting suspicious. Whenever I tried to set up a meeting to discuss the proposal, he'd suddenly be busy. At family dinners, he'd wave off the topic, saying, "Let's talk later." Meanwhile, I was discovering little hints that he'd been hanging around casinos with some of his friends. My parents never questioned him. They acted as though everything was perfectly normal, somehow strange. One night, I got a text from Alex asking if I could meet him at a nearby bar. He said he wanted to show me something important. I assumed he'd finally finished his business plan. Instead, I found him slurring his words about how he owed some people money. I asked him outright if he had been gambling. He tried to deny it, but then confessed he'd lost a few thousand at the casino. When I pressed him on how he got the cash, he mumbled something about borrowing it. That set off alarms in my head. I was livid. I confronted him right there, asking if he was trying to scam me with that so-called business idea. He shook his head and begged me to believe he had a real plan, but got sidetracked by bad influences. I reminded him I wasn't about to toss my life savings into a gamble, literally or figuratively. He asked if I could lend him just a bit of money to get out of his current hole, promising he'd pay me back once he squared away his debts and launched his business. Realistically, though, I told him I needed to think about it. The next day, I tried to talk to my parents about the situation. I explained that Alex might have a gambling problem and that he'd asked me for money. My dad looked concerned, but my mom immediately jumped to Alex's defense, insisting he was just going through a rough patch. She said, "He's your brother. You should be helping him, not accusing him of things." Dad added that families should support each other. I told them I was all for support, but not if I was being deceived. They shrugged it off, as though I was overreacting or imagining issues. I decided not to give Alex any money until I saw real evidence that he wasn't just gambling it all away. Over the next few weeks, I stayed busy with my job, trying not to let this drama consume me. Then one afternoon, I logged into my bank account to transfer some funds, and I froze. $50,000 was gone. At first, I thought it was a glitch, but after checking the transaction history, I saw that the entire sum had been transferred out just 2 days before. I felt my heart pounding in my chest. I was livid. I immediately called the bank. They confirmed the transfer was made using my online credentials. I didn't remember authorizing any such transaction, so I asked how it could happen. The representative said the login came from my IP address. That's when I realized Alex must have used my computer or found my password somehow. I'd let him house sit once or twice, and sometimes we used the same laptop. Furious, I called Alex, but he didn't pick up. I drove straight to my parents' house where he was staying. He was nowhere to be found, and nobody knew where he went. After hours of searching, calling his friends, and leaving voicemails, I finally got a text from him around midnight. It said, "I'm so sorry, I'll fix this. Don't call the cops." I nearly threw my phone across the room. He'd stolen all my savings and had the nerve to tell me not to involve law enforcement. The next morning, I went to my parents and told them I was going to file a police report. My mother started sobbing, saying that would ruin Alex's life. My dad said, "Don't you think we can handle this privately as a family?" Seriously, I glared at them in disbelief. Alex had committed a literal crime, and they were concerned about his life being ruined? What about my life savings, my future? But they insisted we all sit down and talk it through first. I waited an entire day before Alex showed up, looking disheveled and exhausted. He admitted he'd taken the money to try and gamble his way out of the debts he already had. Of course, he lost it all, $50,000, gone in a matter of hours. He pleaded for my forgiveness, saying he never meant to hurt me. Unbelievable. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. He expected me to just say, "It's okay, we're brothers, so no worries." I told him in no uncertain terms that I wasn't going to forgive him and that I wanted my money back, no matter what it took. My mother gasped, and my father shook his head. They started lecturing me about compassion and how Alex was in a dark place. I shot back that I was officially broke because of him. Didn't that matter? Then my mother said something I'll never forget. "You don't deserve that money if you're so heartless." Unreal. I felt something snap inside me. All those years of trying to be responsible, saving bit by bit, sacrificing luxuries, and this was their reaction? I walked out of the house, got into my car, and drove away, ignoring their calls and texts. Over the next few days, I was consumed by rage. I thought about going to the police, but part of me wondered if that would really get me anywhere. Alex had already blown the money. Even if he ended up in jail, I'd still be left with nothing. So I decided to approach it differently. I seethed. I needed proof of what happened, and I needed a plan to make sure Alex and my parents understood the magnitude of what they'd done. First, I hired a lawyer. She explained that while I could file charges, the likelihood of recovering the money was low unless Alex had assets. He didn't. But she also suggested I gather all the evidence I could, bank statements, text messages, any communications admitting guilt. That way, if Alex ever came into money or assets, I could file a civil suit. I agreed and started documenting every detail of his theft and my family's reaction. Next, I started contacting some people Alex owed money to. I discovered he had borrowed from friends, co-workers, and even a local loan shark. Everyone was angry, but no one had taken formal action yet. Some had threatened him, but that only caused him to hide. I decided to let them know exactly what Alex had done to me. I also hinted that if they wanted to coordinate efforts to recoup anything, I'd be willing to share information. This wasn't out of pure spite, although I was truly furious. I felt they should know the full extent of Alex's deceit. My parents tried to intervene when they found out I was talking to Alex's creditors. They claimed I was endangering him, that these were not good people to upset. I retorted that maybe they should have thought about that before defending him unconditionally. My mother's tears no longer moved me. My father's disappointment barely registered. They had made their choice. They wanted me to be the sacrificial lamb to preserve the illusion of a harmonious family. Meanwhile, Alex was running around, dodging responsibility for his gambling addiction. I refused to let them push me aside for his sake any longer. Never. Eventually, Alex realized his entire safety net was gone. Our parents were still somewhat supportive, but they didn't have large sums of money to bail him out. His friends had turned their backs on him, and the loan shark was reportedly sending him threatening messages. He came knocking on my apartment door one night, pleading for a chance to make things right. He offered to repay me by giving me shares in a new venture he was cooking up with some acquaintance. I laughed in his face. Shares? From the same guy who had stolen every penny I had saved? I told him to leave and never show his face again unless he had cold cash. He started crying, saying he was at rock bottom and needed my help. I reminded him that I'd tried to help before, but he'd used me as a personal bank. He then accused me of being heartless, just like our mother had. That was the final straw. I screamed at him to get out, and this time he did, stumbling down the hallway, tears streaming. I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly replaced by the memory of my empty bank account. Days later, I heard from one of his old friends that Alex had been beaten up by the loan shark's goons. Apparently, they wanted their money, and he had nothing to give. My parents called, begging me to help him. I refused. I told them they could sell their possessions if they were so concerned, but I wasn't handing over another dime. They called me cruel, said I was abandoning my own brother in his worst moment. I reminded them that he'd abandoned me first, stealing everything I had. They fell silent, then my mother just sobbed and hung up. I was no longer interested in being the family scapegoat. I decided to cut ties. I blocked their numbers and changed my locks, even moved to a new place. The stress was taking a toll on my health, so I started seeing a therapist. She helped me understand that I wasn't responsible for fixing Alex's life and that my parents were enabling his behavior. Slowly, I came to terms with the fact that my savings were gone, but I refused to stay stuck in anger and self-pity. I channeled my frustration into my work, pushing harder for promotions and raises. Months passed. I was earning more and had rebuilt some of my financial cushion. Occasionally, I'd get voicemails from my parents or messages from Alex, but I ignored them all. I didn't care if they considered me cold. The day Alex stole my money was the day he lost my loyalty. Then, out of the blue, I got a call from a distant relative. Apparently, my great-aunt had passed away and left me a modest inheritance. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough that my parents took notice. Suddenly, they wanted to reconcile and be a family again. They tried to arrange a meeting at the same old house where everything had gone down. I agreed, curiosity. When I arrived, they were all waiting for me in the living room, my mother, father, and Alex, who looked gaunt and nervous. My dad started with small talk, asking about my job, but I cut him off. I said, "Let's skip the pleasantries. What do you want?" My mother stared at Alex, then back at me. She began talking about how people make mistakes, how family is forever, and how they hoped I could find it in my heart to forgive. I held up my hand to stop her. I told them I wasn't here for a reunion. I was there to hear what they wanted. My father finally admitted they hoped I could loan Alex some money to pay off lingering debts and maybe help him start over. I almost burst out laughing. After everything that happened, they still wanted me to bankroll him? I asked if they were delusional or just oblivious. My mother looked at me with watery eyes and Alex stared at the floor. Nobody had an answer. I guess they expected me to just comply. Seriously. Then I pulled out a folder with copies of every document I had, statements showing the unauthorized bank transfer, texts where Alex admitted he stole my money, and notes from our lawyer discussions. I spread them across the coffee table. I explained that I was fully prepared to press charges at any moment, and that I could also file a civil lawsuit to garnish Alex's future earnings if he ever made anything of himself. My parents looked horrified and Alex went pale. I told them I wasn't bluffing. If they ever contacted me again for money, I would proceed. Immediately. Silence filled the room. My mother opened her mouth, but no sound came out. My father just leaned back, closing his eyes. Alex started shaking. Finally, he asked if there was any chance we could be brothers again. I said, "Not after what you did. You took my trust, my savings, and you threw them away. Don't ever expect forgiveness from me." With that, I picked up my documents and walked toward the door. I paused and told them that if they wanted to fix anything, they'd better start by getting Alex into a serious gambling recovery program. I insisted. I left without looking back. In the following weeks, I focused on myself. I used my small inheritance to pay off some lingering bills and put the rest in investments. I continued working hard, and within a year, I'd managed to buy a modest condo. I felt a sense of pride that, despite everything, I was rebuilding my life. As for Alex, I heard bits and pieces through acquaintances. Apparently, he tried rehab a couple of times, but kept relapsing. My parents tried to help him financially again, and it drained their retirement savings. That wasn't my problem anymore. Ever. Then, one afternoon, I got a certified letter from a law firm. At first, I panicked, thinking Alex was trying some legal stunt. But it turned out it was my parents who were suing me, claiming I owed them money for unfairly distancing myself from family obligations. I nearly choked reading that. They were arguing that I had a moral duty to support Alex and that by refusing, I'd caused him emotional distress. My lawyer laughed when she saw it, calling it frivolous. She filed a response immediately, and within weeks, the suit was dismissed. It was a desperate move. That was the final nail in the coffin. I cut them all off permanently. I changed my phone number again, blocked them on social media, and even told mutual friends I didn't want updates. Life became calmer. I channeled my energy into my career, friendships, and personal goals. I took trips, learned new skills, and felt freer than I had in years. Sometimes I'd get a pang of regret or nostalgia for the days when I believed we were a tight-knit family. But then I'd remember how quickly they sided with Alex after he stole from me. That was enough. Yesterday, I got an unexpected message from a mutual friend saying Alex had apparently hit the jackpot at some casino, won a six-figure sum. For a moment, I imagined he might come crawling back, offering to repay what he stole. Then I heard he immediately vanished on a trip to Europe, blowing through the winnings with zero intention of restitution. And you know what? I'm not even mad. I've moved on, rebuilt my savings, and carved out a life without them. If he wants to self-destruct, that's his choice. I no longer feel any obligation. My self-respect is still completely intact.